Welcome to episode 40 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I am Will Townsend, dialing in from beautiful Islamorada, Florida, after escaping the winter weather in Texas last week. And joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. Last week, the SEC announced that they would be redrawing broadband coverage maps in order to address the digital divide. And actually, I've been quite impressed with the interim FCC chairwoman and her focus on this. It's no secret, there was actually money set aside, $65 million in December of last year to do this. But in doing so, this is not going to be a trivial exercise. She estimates that it's going to take until at least 2022 to produce the maps. And this will be pulled from that $9 billion 5G fund for rural America that was put together under the Trump administration. So, obviously, very critical, there's, this big gap in coverage. These maps will be, designed to determine where there's lack of current 4G coverage. And certainly that will help with respect to not only bolstering LTE as a backup, but eventually 5G. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts here, Anshel?
Well, I think it's important for these maps to be drawn properly. I think a lot of people don't understand why these maps matter. A lot of these maps are being used by the carriers to claim certain, coverage. And as a result of these coverage claims, they're able to get funding for certain types of government programs, including this rural program. So I think it's interesting and important that the government find a trusted party that they can rely on to gather real coverage data. I think that there is data out there. And I think if you were to be able to aggregate Ookla and OpenSignal and all the potential data sources that are out there, I think you get a much better idea than what the operators are showing. I think the operators are going to use a test methodology that will benefit, their claims of coverage.
Right.
And I can speak from experience. I've definitely had times where, I did not have coverage, and I should have based on the maps. So I think this is a multi-pronged problem, and it's an expensive one to resolve. But I think ultimately it's important to have if we're going to really spend our government money properly on giving out FCC money for funds in the rural areas. So I think it's a good thing. I wish it could happen faster, as we all do.
Yeah.
But I think setting at realistic expectations and budgets is important. And I'm just glad to hear that the FCC is continuing to move forward on important topics.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. So the FCC shouldn't rely just on the operators, to your point, because there are always these claims about performance and coverage and that sort of thing and reliability. They need to factor in things like Ookla as well. And just a shout out to the FCC. If you need any advice, Anshel and I are available and ready and willing to to help out there. The other point that I'll make too is that as these maps get finalized, from my perspective, obviously mobility is going to be a huge component. When you look at low band spectrum, T-Mobile has been very aggressively rolling out their low band spectrum to get that wide coverage area. You're beginning to see some of their other competitors do the same, but fixed wireless access, I think, is going to be a big part of this as well, to be able to bounce point to point. We've talked on, a prior podcast about the United States Postal Service, wanting to serve as some sort of hub or, mini cell site. And so that could be a play, that there could be FWA deployed there as well. But I do believe it'll be a combination of, of mobile and fixed wireless access. But we'll keep tabs on this, and as things develop, we'll report back. But it does look like the timeline, it's not going to happen overnight. So we'll just have to wait and see how things roll. So let's move to your first topic this week. And T-Mobile made some new subscriber announcements, correct?
Yeah, so T-Mobile has new plans, and these new plans are actually they're a combination of good and bad. One, they're good that they give an option to customers now to have a fully unlimited 5G. So they have a new plan called Magenta Max, which replaces their Magenta Plus, which is currently what I'm on. I'll probably switch to Magenta Max. And Max, what it does is it basically says, okay, now have a nationwide 2.5 gigahertz network, and we are confident that maybe we won't have full coverage today, but in the next year or two, when it matters to us, we will actually have enough capacity in our network that we don't care how much 5G data you use. We'll make you pay for it, but we don't actually care how much 5G data you use. So they're saying that they will no longer cap mobile users at all. The only stipulation is that you will be limited to 40 gigs a month of Wi-Fi hotspot, which is still very generous.
Right.
And they also doubled their standard Magenta plan from a premium data of 50 gigabytes a month to 100 gigabytes per month. So unless you're doing something absolutely wild, you're not going to hit those caps. And realistically, for a lot of people, this could be their home connection. The real issue is that Wi-Fi hotspot is still not as generous. It goes from 3 gigs to 5 gigs on that plan. And then in addition to those plans, they also have a senior 55 plus plan. I hate to say senior because I think my dad's coming up on 55.
I'm pretty close to that as well.
But what's interesting is that plan is $90 for 2 users, and they also get unlimited 5G talk and text for $90 a month. So it's $45 a person for pretty good data speeds, pretty good coverage, and I think it's a good plan. And it comes with 40 gigs of 4G LTE hotspot data as well. So it's a pretty good plan for somebody who doesn't want to spend too much but wants to have a lot for it. And I think overall these plans are very competitive. That said, this Magenta Max plan is $85 for a single line, which is pretty steep. I believe that if you have 4 lines, they discount it down to like 50 something dollars a line. And then if you do this promotional period, I don't know how long that lasts, but I think the promotional period, they're even knocking it down to like $43 per line if you have 4 lines. So they're trying to, this is another, T-Mobile flex where they're trying to take advantage of them being a cost conscious operator, but also trying to add some value. I think a lot of people are going to, balk at the fact that prices are going up, which is a valid concern. But I think that $85 a month for completely unlimited is also not outrageous when you consider other operators don't even offer that option.
Yeah, and T-Mobile has been, sort of the leader, with respect to the data cap thing, right? With unlimited plans. I mean, I think they were at 45 or 50 gigs. So now they're kind of, taking it to another level, removing those data caps, and to your point, providing tremendous value, for the price. And actually, I think that Max plan, even at that level, I think with the additional benefits that you get with it, I think there's still, an extremely, large amount of value, there. But so T-Mobile continues to be disruptive in the consumer space. You and I have had a chance to speak with the team, in particular the T-Mobile for Business team recently. We can't share any of that information at this point, but on a future podcast, I think we'll have some things to share with respect to how T-Mobile, now that Sprint and T-Mobile have come together, how they're going to go focus on the enterprise. And so that's pretty exciting. So we'll share that on a future podcast. But let me move to my second topic this week. I want to talk about the C-band auction. And the kimono was opened on what some of the operators paid, and it raised a record 80, 81, 82 billion dollars. Well, Verizon constituted about half of that at over 45 billion. No surprise, they had huge gaps in their mid-band footprint. And I actually had wrote it before this was revealed this week. Last week, I contributed an article to RCR Wireless, weighing in on some of my insights around C-band, and I kind of identified three areas, and one was this huge price tag, right? And how AT&T, as an example, had to go secure credit facilities in order to sort of finance their spectrum holdings. But the two other things that I also identified with C-band is, we've talked about this before, it's upper mid-band, so it requires densification. So it's not a trivial exercise. It's not going to be an inexpensive exercise. It's going to take them a while, AT&T and Verizon, to densify, at that spectrum level, and be able to roll that out effectively. And then, the third challenge that I identified is just, there have been a ton of challenges with local regulations and those sort of things. And we've talked about the conspiracy theory around, 5G fry your brain and all of that. And, my insight there is that I think, that was really sort of based on that millimeter wave. I mean, that's new. That's something new within 5G, higher spectrum band. That also requires a lot of densification. But there's just been a lot of silly, over-regulation in my mind, even in my hometown of Austin, Texas, where we're very tech savvy, yet our local government, doesn't like the aesthetic look of the massive MIMO antennas, or, they're concerned about these small cell devices being pole mounted, strand mounted, and that sort of thing. So there are going to be a lot of challenges here. So I'm wondering, just sort of beyond what was revealed this week on what Verizon paid, what do you have any additional insights?
Yeah, I think I was interested in the fact that Verizon actually spent more than anyone expected.
Yeah.
I think it was because they were so aggressive in getting that A block. My understanding is the A block is 100 megahertz of spectrum, and that would be the first one released basically the end of this year. But what's interesting is that I think it's 60/40, I think it is. So 60 megahertz goes to Verizon, 20 goes to AT&T.
Mm-hmm.
So they won't have the full spectrum that they've actually bought until later, 2022, which is what we expected. And, it'll take time for clearing and stuff like that. So I think it's probably going to be a year or two until we really see the benefits of this auction. I do think Verizon will have to densify. Verizon already has a fairly dense network, but it's nowhere near as dense as someone like T-Mobile and Sprint, because they had to be dense as a result of the spectrum that they had. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this pans out. But I welcome competition, and I hope that Verizon and AT&T can really, put something together that will be competitive to what T-Mobile will have today. Obviously T-Mobile's network is not fully built out yet. We'll probably see that realistically end of this year, but I think that will set a good benchmark for what AT&T and Verizon have to live up to with their mid-band spectrum.
I agree. Well, let's move to your second topic this week. And, we talk about China often, and the GSMA, released some figures with respect to projections for 5G subscriptions in China.
Yeah, so the GSMA released a, one of their many studies that they do, and they found that their report, the Mobile Economy China, estimates that 5G connections by 2025 will represent 47% of the total mobile connections in China, surging from the current 12%. So currently 12% of China is on 5G, and they expect that it will be 47% by 2025. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
And that,
Conservative in my estimation.
yeah, and that China will be one of the leading countries in terms of 5G adoption by 2025. Also, not an outrageous assumption.
Yeah.
And that they will only fall behind South Korea, the U.S., and Japan in terms of percentage of adoption, which also makes sense because China is a gigantic country.
Yeah.
And the reality is that comes out to 822 million 5G subscribers by 2025. And I think that's totally reasonable considering how many 5G mobile subscribers there are in China, which is well over 1 billion.
Yeah.
And all I can say is that this is a conservative, as you said, and I think that we might even see even a faster uptake because everything about 5G has been faster and more aggressive than 4G was by a lot. Because I remember the 4G rollout. I was a newly minted journalist at the time, and I was running around with Verizon USB dongles because those are the only devices you could get in your hands to test the new 4G network.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, because I have one. I mean, yeah, just given the sheer population of China and the aggressiveness of, the telecom operators, they're the big three. And obviously, because it's China, there's a lot of government intervention and subsidy going on there. Do you think that as they accelerate their subscriber base, and I'm going to hold my opinion back because I want to hear yours first, do you think that gives China an advantage relative to the US and other countries as far as leveraging 5G to drive GDP growth?
Oh, 100%. I think there's a lot of fear mongering about the 5G race.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot. But the truth is that no matter how far behind China is or how far ahead they will always have a structural advantage in that the government is fully invested in ensuring that 5G is deployed in a uniform, consistent, standardized way that facilitates an environment that will ensure new industries that will prop up as a result of 5G. They're going to go full on, force every car manufacturer to standardize around one 5G standard for automotive. They're going to make everybody, all cities standardize around this specific standard for car infrastructure. It's like they're going to mandate things that we simply cannot because the central government has that kind of power in China. And I just think that they will have an advantage on 5G regardless of what we do. But it will be interesting to see how much their regulatory advantage will help because, the reality is that whatever the central government wants happens. And we just don't have that kind of power in the US. And having, a uniform regulation allows for faster adoption of new technologies. And that's just the way it is. That said, it also allows for less creativity and less flexibility. So there are some trade-offs. So the possibility is that, they might get new use cases before we do. And that's just the way it is. And I don't think there's anything the US government can do other than try and, gather all of the different interested parties in the US and make sure that they at least understand each other and work together. And like you've mentioned before, having those barriers in localities with, city councils is probably the biggest barrier I think we have.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so I agree with you. I think it does give China an advantage. Time will tell if the US can catch up. We tend to be very resilient and creative and lean into, our software, expertise and that sort of thing, and semiconductor expertise. And, China's very good at, lot size one manufacturing, but 5G is definitely a game changer. So it'll be interesting to kind of keep tabs on this. And that's a nice segue to my third and final topic this week, talking about government involvement. It was announced that DARPA and the Linux Foundation are collaborating together to deploy 5G for U.S. federal government use cases. And we've talked about DARPA on prior podcasts. And I think for a lot of people, when they think of open source, they think, oh my gosh, open source, isn't that vulnerable? You're using a common kernel, software kernel, and could that be kind of a security risk? And I've spent a lot of time with the Linux Foundation, spent a lot of time with open source, and one of the superpowers I think that open source brings is that because you have so many eyeballs upstream and downstream, that actually it bolsters the security aspects of it as well. And so I wasn't that surprised when I saw this announcement. There's actually going to be a conference held in March. It's an open networking forum event where I don't know to what degree they're going to present the details, right? Because this is tied to national security, but there's going to be a discussion around further discussion around this collaboration. So I think this really sort of points to all the goodness that the Linux Foundation, the networking team, has been focused on to drive open source connectivity, not only on the enterprise side of things, but on the service provider side of things. So do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is I think one of the good points that kind of shows how much Linux has matured and the attitude towards Linux has matured is the fact that the new rover on Mars is running on Linux and open source software.
Good point.
And that's defense grade technology. Like you can't send something into space anymore. Well, you never really could, but you can't send things to space unless you are defense grade for pretty much everything.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that NASA has already gone that route, and I think it's a very likely possibility that we'll see the same thing happening with 5G infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when you look at what's happening with disaggregation in the RAN and this whole momentum behind Open RAN, and a lot of that's being driven to kind of wean the U.S. off its dependence on companies that are located in other parts of the world, even in Europe, not just China, for 5G infrastructure. So so it's definitely a trend that's moving in that direction. Well, let's hit your third and final topic this week, and the dust hasn't even settled yet on this landmark C-band auction, and the FCC is readying another mid-band auction, right?
Yeah, so this is actually something that's already been in flight since the last administration. There was a study that was made by the Department of Defense for 3.45 gigahertz to 3.55 gigahertz. And this is a band that's currently being used, but they are looking for a way to clear it. And the expectation is that there will be a way to make this possible. And many of the existing users will be tried to relocate to 2.9 to 3.0 gigahertz. So the thing is, it's 100 megahertz of spectrum, and it's a lower band than what is currently available for Verizon and AT&T in the C-band. So it will propagate a little better. But what's interesting is this is also the harmonized global 5G band, which is 3.5 gigahertz. So it's actually kind of interesting because that would potentially allow for an interoperability band in the US for people to roam from abroad that have devices that are specifically tuned to 3.5 gigahertz, but might not support all of our bands because there's so many 5G bands now. It's possible that they will support all bands. If it's like a Qualcomm solution, probably will. But if it's a lower cost 5G solution, us adopting a 3.5 gigahertz band could be a beneficial thing for the world and for us as well. So when we have devices that work in 3.5, we can go abroad and they also work. That was kind of the whole point of harmonizing that band. That said, this is not a done deal. It was supposed to happen in December. I mean this December, not last December. That was the expectation set by the administration, but now it sounds like they might move it up to October. So we might know before the end of the year who could actually have this spectrum and how it will be utilized. and by whom. But considering that Verizon and AT&T both just spent 25 and $45 billion,
respectively,
I 45 and $25 billion respectively, I think that they're probably not that much of an appetite to buy that spectrum. T-Mobile spent about 10 billion, so they might be interested, but it's possible we could see some of the bidders that didn't bid on any C-band, like the cable companies, or maybe even a US Cellular who spent, I think, a couple billion. We could see them getting involved. So it'll be interesting to see who gets interested in this. We could also see, some private equity firms which also bid on some spectrum, buy that up and hold on to it, expecting its value to increase as some operators reach out and think, oh, we've got holes in these areas we want to fill with 3.5. So we'll see what happens. But it's an interesting thing. It's good for, I think, the industry because we need more spectrum, and the more spectrum we have, the less scarce it is, and the less scarce it is, the less people overpay for spectrum and eventually overpay for service and connectivity.
Yeah, you mentioned US Cellular. So they're focused on a lot of rural America. And to your point, this swath of spectrum, propagates a little bit better than what we just, saw, auctioned in C-band. And so why on earth wouldn't the FCC consider some sort of carve out? I don't want to say subsidy, but some sort of carve out for US Cellular, because they didn't really purchase a lot of spectrum in this last auction. And and if we really want to solve this digital divide issue and get cellular connectivity out into rural America, I think instead of just continuing to fill the government coffers, there should be a carve out. I think that would be fair. But
I just think I think part of the reason why they didn't bid on C-band is because it's 3.7 to 4 gigahertz, and that's going to be really hard for them to build out.
It would be, just those assets would be really, really difficult for them to build out, just given the the part of the country that they focus on. I agree with you 100%. Well, hey Anshel, it was another great podcast. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope that you guys our listeners and viewers enjoyed this week's podcast. If anyone out there would like to provide insight on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will as at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sag. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.